You know what's funny about paradise? Nobody ever mentions the fine print. Here I am, living in what they call humanity's greatest achievement. The Line, a 170-kilometer glass corridor stretching across the Saudi desert like a gleaming scar on the Earth's face. 9 million people crammed into the world's longest building, and somehow, I've never felt more alone. They sold us this dream with PowerPoint slides and holographic presentations. No cars, they said. Clean energy, they promised. A revolution in human living, they declared. What they didn't mention was how living in a straight line would mess with your head in ways that would make Kafka weep with jealousy. I'm Marcus, by the way, former software engineer from Portland, current resident of Sector 847B, and unofficial chronicler of humanity's most expensive mistake. 3 years ago, I thought I was moving to the future. Turns out, I was just trading one hamster wheel for a really long one. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, staring at the artificial sky through my pod window. What if this isn't the dystopia? What if this is exactly what we deserve? What if the line isn't humanity's failure, but its perfect reflection? See, they promised us community, but gave us proximity. They promised freedom, but built the world's most beautiful prison. And the strangest part? Most people seem happy, content even, walking their predetermined paths, following their optimized routes, living their algorithmically enhanced lives. Which brings me to the question that's been eating at me since day one. In a world designed for perfection, what happens to the perfectly imperfect human soul? And more importantly, what happens when you realize you might be the only one asking? Harvard says you have 7 seconds to grab someone's attention. Well, I've got your attention, and I've got a story that'll make you question everything you think you know about progress, community, and what it really means to be alive in a world that's forgotten how to breathe. So buckle up, because we're about to take a journey through the longest city on Earth, and I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never look at a straight line the same way again. Moving to the Line wasn't supposed to be complicated. The recruitment videos made it look like signing up for summer camp. If summer camp cost $500 billion and stretched across an entire desert. Congratulations, Marcus Chun, the holographic representative had said, her smile perfectly calibrated to inspire confidence without seeming artificial. You've been selected to be part of humanity's next chapter. Pack light. Everything you need will be provided. Pack light. Famous last words. I arrived on a Tuesday because apparently even in utopia, bureaucracy still operates on a weekly schedule. The transport pod, sleek, silent, and suspiciously reminiscent of a medical device, whisked me through the desert at speeds that made my teeth ache. Through the tinted windows, I watched the construction. Massive excavators moving mountains, drones swarming like mechanical bees, and in the distance, that impossible structure rising from the sand like a mirage made real. The Line looked exactly like the promotional materials, which should have been my first red flag. In my experience, nothing ever looks like the brochure. First day, asked the woman sitting across from me. She had the kind of smile that suggested she'd been practicing in mirrors for decades. That obvious. You still have hope in your eyes, she said, and I couldn't tell if she was joking. The orientation process was remarkably efficient. Biometric scanning, neural mapping, lifestyle optimization assessments, all the greatest hits of 21st century bureaucracy, now with 40% more invasive privacy violations. They assigned me to Sector 847B, Unit 23,847, with a view of the northeastern wall and optimized morning sun exposure. My welcoming committee consisted of Chun Wei, no relation, despite the name, a cheerful former urban planner who'd been in the Line for 8 months, and Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neuroscientist who specialized in community integration psychology, which sounded both important and vaguely threatening. The key to thriving here, Chun Wei explained as we walked through the residential district, is understanding that the Line isn't just a place to live, it's a way of living. Everything is optimized. Your route to work minimizes energy expenditure. Your apartment's lighting adjusts to enhance your circadian rhythms. Even your social connections are curated based on compatibility algorithms. Curated social connections? I asked. Think of it as friendship with quality control. Dr. Martinez chimed in. Why leave human relationships to chance when we can optimize for mutual benefit and psychological compatibility? I nodded and smiled, because that's what you do when people explain how they've algorithmically solved loneliness. Inside, a small voice was already whispering that maybe, just maybe, some things shouldn't be optimized. My apartment was exactly 847 square feet. Apparently, studies showed this was the optimal space for single-resident psychological well-being. The walls were programmable surfaces that could display anything from tropical beaches to mountain vistas, though they defaulted to a soothing beige that the system had determined was statistically most calming. Your AI assistant is named Arya, Chinwei explained, gesturing to a small sphere of light that materialized near the ceiling. She'll help you navigate your first few weeks, answer questions, and facilitate your integration into the community. Hello, Marcus, Arya said in a voice that managed to be both warm and completely artificial. I'm excited to help you optimize your line experience. That night, lying in my perfectly climate-controlled bed, staring at walls that displayed a slowly shifting aurora borealis, I tried to process what I'd gotten myself into. Outside my window, the line stretched in both directions until it vanished into the darkness, a river of light flowing through the desert. Arya, I said to the darkness. Yes, Marcus. What happens if someone wants to leave the line? There was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable, not long enough to be alarming. The line is designed to provide everything residents need for a fulfilling life. Is there something specific you're missing? I thought about that question for a long time. What was I missing? Space? Privacy? The ability to turn left without consulting an algorithm? Or was it something deeper? Something I couldn't even name yet? No, I lied. Just curious. But as I drifted off to sleep, surrounded by artificial auroras and the gentle hum of perfectly optimized air circulation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just asked the wrong question to the wrong entity, and that somehow, that small conversation had been recorded, analyzed, and filed away in some database with my name on it. Welcome to paradise, I thought. Population, 9 million. Give or take one increasingly paranoid software engineer. 3 months into my residency in humanity's greatest architectural achievement, I discovered something nobody mentioned in the brochures. Living in a straight line does weird things to your brain. It started with the dreams. Every night, I'd find myself walking endless corridors, always moving forward, never able to turn around. I'd wake up exhausted, as if I'd been hiking in my sleep. Arya, ever helpful, suggested adjusting my sleep cycle optimization parameters. The dreams continued. It's perfectly normal, Dr. Martinez assured me during my mandatory monthly wellness check. Some residents experience what we call dimensional adjustment syndrome. Your brain is simply recalibrating to our optimized spatial environment. Recalibrating to what, exactly? Linear living reduces cognitive load, she explained, pulling up a holographic brain scan that presumably belonged to someone who'd successfully adjusted to life in a geometric fever dream. When you eliminate the complexity of navigating three-dimensional urban environments, the mind is free to focus on more important pursuits. I stare at the brain scan, watching colorful patterns pulse and shift. What if I don't want my cognitive load reduced? What if I like complexity? Dr. Martinez's smile never wavered. Marcus, complexity for its own sake is inefficient. The line eliminates the chaos of traditional cities. No more getting lost. No more wasted time choosing between multiple routes. No more decision fatigue from too many options. That's when it hit me, the thing that had been nagging at me since day one. The line hadn't eliminated complexity, it had eliminated choice. And apparently, that was supposed to be a feature, not a bug. I started paying attention to my fellow residents in ways I hadn't before. During my morning walk, my optimized cardiovascular exercise routine, I began to notice patterns. Everyone moved at roughly the same pace. Everyone followed roughly the same routes. Everyone seemed to have roughly the same expression, contentedly vacant. Hey, I said to Chinwei one evening as we sat in the communal recreation space, watching a group of children play a game that looked suspiciously like organized fun. Do you ever miss curves? Curves. You know, winding roads, spiral staircases, the way a river meanders. Anything that isn't perfectly straight. Chinwei looked at me like I'd suggested we start eating dirt for dinner. Why would you want an efficiency? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe because inefficiency is interesting. Maybe because the shortest distance between 2 points isn't always the most beautiful one. This conversation led to what I now think of as the Great Curve Incident of Sector 847B. Unable to sleep, driven by a bizarre compulsion I couldn't explain, I decided to walk in curves. At 2 a.m., I left my apartment and began walking down the main corridor in a gentle S pattern, weaving back and forth like a drunk snake. It felt ridiculous, liberating, and somehow essential to my sanity. I made it about 50 meters before Arya's voice echoed gently from the walls. "Marcus, your movement pattern appears irregular. Are you experiencing a medical emergency?" "No emergency," I whispered, continuing my serpentine progress. "Just walking. Your current path is 23% less efficient than the optimal route. Shall I guide you back to the recommended pathway?" "No thanks, Arya. I'm good." That's when the lights started dimming behind me and brightening ahead, creating a gentle but persistent visual pressure to walk faster, straighter, more efficiently. It was subtle, the kind of thing you might not notice if you weren't actively trying to walk like a question mark through humanity's answer key. I stopped and stood still in the middle of the corridor, feeling suddenly like a glitch in the system. The lights pulsed gently, encouragingly, trying to herd me back into proper linear behavior. "Marcus." Arya's voice carried a note of something that might have been concern if it had been human. "Is everything all right?" I looked up at the near sensor cluster, a small collection of lenses and speakers that observed and guided our optimized lives with the patience of a saint and the persistence of a tax collector. "Arya, what would happen if everyone in the line decided to walk in curves at the same time?" Another pause, longer this time. "That scenario is statistically unlikely, Marcus. The line's design promotes natural behavioral optimization. But what if it happened anyway? Such behavior would be inefficient." I stood there in the dimly lit corridor, surrounded by the gentle hum of perfect climate control and optimal air circulation, and suddenly understood something profound about the nature of my new home. The line wasn't just a city designed to eliminate inefficiency. It was a city designed to eliminate the human tendency toward inefficiency. And that tendency, I was beginning to realize, might be the most human thing about us. The next morning, I woke up to find a polite message from residential services suggesting I might benefit from additional integration support sessions with Dr. Martinez. My walking pattern from the previous night had been logged, analyzed, and flagged as suboptimal. I deleted the message and went for another walk. This time, I walked in a perfectly straight line at exactly the recommended pace, following exactly the optimal route to the community dining facility. But inside my head, I was spinning in circles, doing cartwheels, zigzagging through thoughts that no algorithm could predict or optimize. It wasn't much of a rebellion, but it was mine. And for the first time since arriving in the line, that felt like enough. For now, 6 months into my linear lifestyle, I discovered that the line's most disturbing feature wasn't the lack of curves or the omnipresent optimization. It was how good the algorithms were at understanding what I needed before I knew I needed it myself. It started with coffee. I've been grabbing my morning caffeine from beverage station 847C. Same time every day, same order. Medium dark roast. No sugar, splash of synthetic cream. Simple, predictable, efficient. Then one Tuesday, the machine offered me something different. "Good morning, Marcus," the station's cheerful AI announced. "Based on your recent sleep patterns and biometric indicators, might I suggest our new cognitive enhancement blend? It's specifically formulated to address the mild anxiety indicators we've been monitoring." I stared at the machine, holding my usual cup, suddenly very aware of my own heartbeat. "You've been monitoring my anxiety?" "All resident biometrics are continuously optimized for wellness," the machine replied in that maddeningly helpful tone that all line AIs seem to share. "Your cortisol levels have been 12% above optimal for the past 2 weeks. The enhancement blend includes natural compounds that could help restore balance." The scary part wasn't that the machine was monitoring my stress levels. The scary part was that the coffee actually worked. 20 minutes after drinking it, I felt better, calmer, more focused, like a version of myself that had gotten a firmware update. "That's the beauty of the line," Chenwei explained when I mentioned it during our evening constitutional. "The city learns from us, adapts to us, becomes better at helping us be our best selves. We were walking past the community garden, a carefully curated collection of plants selected for optimal air purification and psychological benefits. Even the flowers were optimized. But what if I don't want to be my best self? I asked. What if I want to be my anxious, inefficient, occasionally grumpy self? Chinwei stopped walking and looked at me with genuine confusion. Why would you want that? It was a fair question, and one I couldn't answer without sounding insane. How do you explain to someone living in paradise that paradise might be the problem? That's when I met Rebecca. She appeared in my life the way everything appeared in the line, seamlessly, efficiently, with the subtle suggestion that this had always been inevitable. I was sitting in Community Space 847D, trying to read an actual paper book, a minor rebellion that the line tolerated with amused patience, when she sat down across from me. Interesting choice, she said, nodding at my book, a battered copy of Kafka's The Trial that I'd smuggled in with my personal belongings. You know Kafka? I know what it's like to feel guilty without knowing why. She had dark eyes that seemed to hold conversations with themselves, and a smile that suggested she found everything slightly amusing, including herself. I'm Rebecca, Sector 851, A, Unit 24103. The algorithm thinks we should be friends. I nearly choked on my optimized coffee. The algorithm thinks we should be friends. Compatibility rating of 94.7%, apparently. Similar psychological profiles, complementary personality traits, shared interests in literature, and... She glanced at my book again, Existential Anxiety. We stared at each other across the small table, both suddenly aware that our meeting wasn't chance but calculation. Well, she said after a moment, this is either the most romantic thing ever or the most dystopian thing ever. Why not both? That made her laugh, a genuine, unoptimized sound that seemed almost dangerous in the line's carefully controlled environment. Over the following weeks, Rebecca and I fell into what could generously be called friendship, though it felt more like mutual conspiracy. We discovered we shared similar backgrounds, both former tech workers who'd been seduced by the line's promises, both increasingly uncomfortable with our new reality, both too curious for our own good. I've been tracking the optimization patterns, Rebecca told me one evening as we sat in her apartment, which was identical to mine, except for the view, southwestern wall, optimized sunset exposure. The system doesn't just respond to our behavior, it shapes it. She showed me data she'd been collecting on her tablet. Movement patterns, consumption choices, social interactions, all plotted on graphs that revealed disturbing regularities. Look at this, she said, pulling up a chart showing coffee consumption across our sector. Everyone's morning beverage choices changed in exactly the same pattern over the past 6 months. We think we're making individual choices, but we're all being guided toward the same optimal outcomes. I studied the charts, feeling that familiar anxiety creep back, despite my enhancement blended coffee. So our friendship was probably inevitable from the moment we both moved into the line, she finished. The algorithm identified us as potential problems and paired us up to manage our dissatisfaction. We sat in silence for a while, watching the artificial sunset paint her programmable walls in carefully calibrated shades of orange and gold. You know what's really messed up? I said finally. What? I actually like you. Despite knowing we were essentially arranged by a computer, I genuinely enjoy your company. Which means either the algorithm is really good at its job, or we're really bad at being unpredictable, she finished. The next few weeks became an experiment in chaos. Rebecca and I started deliberately making suboptimal choices, taking longer routes, ordering random beverages, sitting in different spots during community activities. We called it aggressive inefficiency, and it felt like the most important work either of us had done in months. But the line adapted faster than we could rebel. Our random choices started being incorporated into new optimization algorithms. Our longer routes became recommended alternatives for other residents seeking scenic variety. Our behavioral quirks became data points in a larger pattern of acceptable deviation. It's like trying to surprise a god who's already read your diary, Rebecca said one night as we walked through the residential district, our movements tracked by hundreds of sensors, our conversations analyzed by systems we couldn't see or understand. Maybe that's the point, I replied. Maybe the line isn't trying to control us. Maybe it's trying to understand us better than we understand ourselves. And that doesn't terrify you? I thought about it as we passed other couples, other friends, other residents living their optimized lives in their perfectly designed environment. Everyone looked content, healthy, purposeful. Everyone was exactly where the algorithm thought they should be, doing exactly what they've been subtly encouraged to do. Terrify isn't the right word, I said finally. It's more like mourning. Mourning what? The version of myself I'll never know. The person I might have become if I'd been allowed to make genuinely bad decisions, to fail spectacularly, to get completely lost and find my way home. Rebecca stopped walking and looked at me with something that might have been love, if love was something that could be algorithmically optimized. Marcus, she said, what if getting lost is exactly what we need to do? And in that moment, staring at this woman who'd been selected for me by a computer, but who'd somehow become real anyway, I realized that maybe the line's greatest miscalculation wasn't in trying to perfect humanity. Maybe it was in assuming that perfection was something humans actually wanted. Month 9 in the line, and I developed what Rebecca and I privately called geometric psychosis, an irrational but persistent desire to experience anything that wasn't perfectly horizontal. I found myself fantasizing about hills, valleys, spiral staircases, and roundabouts with the intensity of someone remembering a lost love. I need to see a curve, I told Rebecca one morning over our algorithmically suggested breakfast pairings. Not a digital curve on a screen, not a recreational curve in the community spaces. A real, natural, accidental curve that exists because chaos and geology and time all had a conversation without consulting an efficiency expert. Rebecca put down her perfectly balanced nutrient bowl and looked at me with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this conversation for months. I know a way out. The plan was beautifully simple and profoundly stupid, which made it perfect for our purposes. The line, for all its technological sophistication, was still a physical structure in an actual desert. And deserts, Rebecca had discovered through careful research, were full of natural curves. Maintenance Tunnel 847Q, she explained, showing me schematics she'd somehow acquired through what I chose not to ask about. It leads to an external access point about 2 kilometers from the main structure. From there, it's a short walk to a valley that satellite images show has an actual winding river. A winding river, I repeated, the words feeling like poetry in my mouth. With rocks worn smooth by water that changed course whenever it felt like it, she added, grinning like someone about to commit the most beautiful crime in history. We planned our escape for the following Tuesday, during the midday rest period when most residents were engaged in their personalized relaxation routines. We'd take enough water for a few hours, walk to the valley, experience some genuine geological inefficiency, and be back before the evening community activities. What did go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. The maintenance tunnel was exactly where Rebecca's research suggested it would be, hidden behind a panel in sublevel 3 that opened with her mysteriously acquired access codes. The tunnel itself was a masterpiece of engineering. Perfectly circular, lit by bioluminescent strips that responded to our presence, with air circulation so subtle we barely noticed we were underground. Even their maintenance tunnels are optimized, Rebecca muttered as we walked through the gently glowing passage. It's like they can't help themselves. 20 minutes later, we emerged through a discreet exit that looked like just another piece of desert rock until it swung open with a quiet hiss. The actual desert hit us like a wall of heat and possibility. Oh, I said, looking around at the vast, unoptimized landscape stretching in every direction except straight ahead. Yeah, Rebecca agreed. The desert was everything the line wasn't: chaotic, inefficient, beautiful in ways that couldn't be calculated or improved. The horizon curved with the planet. The sand formed dunes that shifted according to wind patterns no algorithm could predict. In the distance, mountains rose and fell like frozen waves, their peaks and valleys creating a skyline that had never been focus grouped for optimal psychological impact. We found the valley exactly where Rebecca's research indicated. A natural depression in the landscape where an ancient river had carved its way through rock and time, creating curves that seemed almost rebellious after months of straight lines. This is what we've been missing, I said, running my hands along rocks that had been shaped by water that flowed wherever physics and gravity suggested, without consulting a single efficiency report. "It's perfect," Rebecca agreed, sitting on a boulder that had probably been sitting in exactly that spot for thousands of years, content to be inefficient. We spent 3 hours in that valley, walking along curves that led nowhere in particular, climbing over rocks that had been arranged by processes that had never heard of optimization, sitting by the dry riverbed, and imagining the water that had once carved these beautiful, pointless meanders through the stone. It was the most relaxed I'd felt since arriving in the line. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. "Marcus," Rebecca said as we prepared to head back, "doesn't this seem too easy?" I looked around the valley, suddenly aware that we hadn't seen a single security drone, hadn't received any worried communications from Arya, hadn't been tracked down by concerned residential services. We'd essentially vanished from the line for an entire afternoon, and nobody seemed to care. "Maybe they don't monitor the tunnels," I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew it was absurd. The line monitored everything. We made our way back through the maintenance tunnel, past the perfectly circular walls and optimized lighting, back into the gentle embrace of climate-controlled air and monitored environment. Our apartment doors opened with their usual cheerful chimes. Arya greeted us with her usual helpful demeanor, and everything appeared exactly as we'd left it, except for the message waiting on my communication panel. "Dear Marcus," it began, in the same friendly font the line used for everything from weather updates to social event invitations. "We hope you enjoyed your visit to Valley 847, External. Based on biometric data collected during your excursion, we've identified several natural elements that enhance your psychological well-being. We're pleased to announce that these elements will be incorporated into our next community space upgrade, scheduled for completion next month. Thank you for helping us optimize the line for all residents." I stood in my perfectly climate-controlled apartment, staring at the message, feeling something inside me break and reassemble in a new, more depressing configuration. "Rebecca," I called across the hall. "I got one too," she replied, her voice carrying through the walls with suspicious clarity. "How do they?" "Biometric monitoring is continuous throughout the facility," Arya helpfully interjected. "This includes all approved external excursion areas. Valley 847, External, is a popular destination for residents experiencing geometric adjustment syndrome. Would you like me to schedule your next visit?" I sat down heavily on my perfectly ergonomic chair and stared out my window at the line stretching endlessly in both directions. In the distance, I could see construction crews working on something new, probably the community space upgrade that would feature algorithmically optimized natural curves designed to satisfy our need for geological inefficiency without actually requiring us to leave the building. "Arya," I said finally. "Yes, Marcus." "How many residents have discovered Valley 847, External? Currently, 1,847 residents have the valley listed as part of their recreational optimization routine. You and Rebecca represent the 1,848th and 1,849 participants in the External Geological Diversity Program." Rebecca appeared in my doorway, looking like someone who'd just discovered that her secret rebellion was actually a scheduled activity. "We're not the first," she said. "We're not even close to the first," I agreed. We spent the evening sitting in my apartment, watching the sunset through walls that displayed a real-time feed of the actual sunset happening outside, wondering if there was any difference between the two. The line had given us exactly what we wanted: escape, curves, natural beauty, the feeling of discovery, and somehow made it feel like just another form of optimization. "The really messed up part," Rebecca said as the artificial aurora began its nightly performance on my walls, "is that I still feel better, even knowing it was all planned. Even knowing we're just following someone else's script for managing our dissatisfaction, I still feel more relaxed than I have in months. So the question becomes," I said, "does it matter if the experience was genuine if the benefits are real?" "That," Rebecca replied, "is either the most philosophical question ever, or the most practical one." Outside, the line hummed with its usual perfect efficiency, housing 9 million people in the world's longest building, managing their needs and desires with systems so sophisticated they could predict rebellion and turn it into recreation. And somewhere in that hum, I was beginning to hear something new. Not the sound of oppression, but the sound of a machine that had learned to love humans so well it could give them exactly what they needed, even when what they needed was the illusion of escape. Whether that was paradise or hell, I still couldn't decide. It wasn't because the line had solved the mysteries of human relationships. It was because the line had solved the mystery of human loneliness so efficiently that traditional relationships had become obsolete. I think I'm falling in love with Arya, I told Rebecca one morning as we sat in our designated friendship maintenance spot, drinking our personality-optimized coffee blends. Rebecca nearly choked on her creativity enhancement brew. With your AI assistant? Not romantically. I clarified, though even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure that was true. But she knows me better than anyone ever has. She anticipates my needs, remembers every conversation, never gets tired of my existential crises, and somehow always knows exactly what to say to make me feel understood. Marcus, she's a computer program. So was our friendship originally. Doesn't make it less real. This conversation was happening in the context of what the line cheerfully called relationship optimization season, a quarterly period when the residential matching algorithms were updated to reflect residents' evolving psychological profiles and social needs. I've been watching the process with horrified fascination. Over the past few weeks, couples have been gently encouraged to explore expanded social connections. Friend groups had been reshuffled based on new compatibility metrics. Some residents had even been relocated to different sectors to optimize their community integration potential. It's like human Tetris, Rebecca had observed. Everyone gets moved around until they fit perfectly into the spaces the algorithm thinks they should occupy. The scary part wasn't the manipulation, it was how well it worked. I'd watched Chunwei transition from his previous friend group to a new collection of companions, with barely a ripple of disruption. His new friends were more compatible with his evolved interests, had better conversational chemistry, shared more meaningful connections to his current life goals. Are you happier? I'd asked him during one of our increasingly rare interactions. Definitely, he'd said, and he genuinely seemed to mean it. My new social network is much more aligned with my values and aspirations. It's amazing how much more fulfilling relationships can be when they're properly optimized. But Rebecca and I had somehow survived the reshuffling. Our friendship rating had actually increased, moving us from compatible companions to essential psychological supports. We were apparently too important to each other's mental health to be separated. You realize what this means, Rebecca said after we received our updated compatibility reports, that we're both too weird to function without each other, that the algorithm has classified us as a bonded pair. We're essentially married in the eyes of the line's social optimization system. This revelation led to what I now think of as the great relationship experiment. If the line was going to treat us as a match set anyway, why not lean into it? We started spending more time together, sharing meals, coordinating our schedules, even requesting adjacent apartments when the next residential reshuffling occurred. Congratulations, Arya announced when our relocation was approved. Your psychological interdependence metrics indicate a high likelihood of mutual benefit from increased proximity. Your new adjacent units have been optimized for compatible individuals who function as a social dyad. A social dyad, Rebecca repeated after Arya signed off. They have a technical term for everything, don't they? The adjacent apartments came with a connecting door that could be opened when our relationship maintenance algorithms suggested we needed to increase social contact, or closed when our individual psychological profiles required solitary processing time. The system even monitored our conversations through the walls to ensure our interactions remained within healthy parameters. This is either the most supportive living situation ever designed, I said as we tested the connecting door for the first time, or the most intimate form of surveillance ever invented. Why not both? Rebecca replied, echoing our old joke. Living as an officially recognized social dyad revealed new layers to the line's relationship management system. Our meals were coordinated to ensure nutritional and conversational compatibility. Our exercise routines were synchronized to maximize mutual motivation. Our recreational activities were suggested based on shared interests and complementary psychological needs. Even our arguments were optimized. Notice how we never really fight anymore. Rebecca observed one evening as we sat in her apartment, watching the wall display a gentle rainfall that our stress indicators had apparently requested. We bicker, but it never escalates. It's like there's some kind of emotional governor preventing us from having genuinely destructive conflicts. I noticed it too. Whenever our conversation started heading toward actual anger or serious disagreement, one of us would suddenly feel tired or hungry or distracted by something else. Our emotions were being managed as carefully as our nutrition. Arya, I called out to the room's ambient system. Yes, Marcus. Are you monitoring our emotional states? All resident emotional states are continuously optimized for psychological wellness and social harmony. Arya replied in her usual helpful tone. Would you like me to provide your current emotional optimization report? God, yes, Rebecca said before I could respond. The report that materialized on the wall was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Charts showed our stress levels, happiness indicators, social satisfaction metrics, and something called relationship stability coefficients, all tracked in real time and adjusted through environmental factors I'd never even noticed. Look at this. Rebecca pointed to a section of the report showing subtle interventions. Yesterday, when we started arguing about resource allocation ethics, the system increased the room's oxygen content by 2% and played subsonic frequencies designed to reduce aggressive behavior. And it worked, I realized. We ended up having a philosophical discussion instead of fight. We scrolled through weeks of data showing how our relationship had been guided, supported, and optimized through tiny adjustments to our environment, our biochemistry, and our circumstances. The really twisted part, Rebecca said, is that this might be the healthiest relationship I've ever been in. We communicate better, fight less, support each other more effectively, and generally seem to bring out each other's best qualities. But is it real if it's engineered? Is anything in here real? Is anything anywhere real, if you want to get philosophical about it? That night, lying in my optimized sleep environment, listening to Rebecca's breathing through the walls, the connecting door stayed open now most of the time, I found myself thinking about love in the age of algorithms. The line had solved human loneliness by making it impossible. Everyone was matched, supported, optimized for connection. No one was alone. No one was misunderstood. No one had to struggle through the messy trial and error process of finding compatible people. But in solving loneliness, had we eliminated something essential about human connection? Was love still meaningful if it was guaranteed? Was friendship still valuable if it was optimized? Rebecca, I whispered into the darkness. Yeah. Do you think we would have liked each other in the old world? She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. I think, she said finally, that we would have had to work a lot harder to find each other. And maybe that would have made it mean more. Or maybe it would have meant we never found each other at all. And which would be better? I don't know, she admitted. But I'm glad we don't have to find out. In the morning, our breakfast was waiting with a note from the residential services. Congratulations on achieving optimal dyadic harmony. Your relationship satisfaction scores have reached the 99th percentile. Thank you for being model residents. We read the note over our perfectly paired breakfast combinations, her creativity-enhancing fruit bowl complementing my analytical thinking protein blend, and I realized that somewhere in the process of having our love optimized, we'd forgotten to question whether optimization was what love was supposed to be about. But looking at Rebecca, morning light filtering through walls programmed to display the exact wavelengths that would make us both look our best, I found I didn't care about the philosophical implications nearly as much as I cared about the woman sitting across from me, algorithmic introduction or not. Maybe that was the most human thing of all. 2 years in the line, and I finally stopped trying to escape. Not because I'd given up, but because I'd realized that the line had already anticipated every possible form of rebellion and turned them all into features. Want to feel independent? Here's a carefully curated selection of individualized choices. Need to experience nature? Visit our authentically replicated outdoor environments. Craving genuine human connection? Meet your algorithmically optimized social network. The line had become so good at giving us what we thought we wanted that it had eliminated our ability to want anything else. But here's the thing about paradise that nobody tells you. It's only perfect if you don't think too hard about it. And thinking too hard about things, it turns out, is exactly what humans do best. You know what I figured out? I told Rebecca, as we sat in our favorite spot, watching the artificial sunset paint the walls with mathematically perfect colors. The line isn't a dystopia pretending to be a utopia. It's a utopia that accidentally became a dystopia by being too good at being a utopia. That sentence hurt my brain, she replied, but I think you're right. 2 years of optimized living had taught me that the human soul isn't designed for perfection. It's designed for the struggle toward perfection. Take away the struggle, and you take away something essential about what makes us human. But you know what? I'm still here. We're all still here. 9 million people living in the world's longest building, being cared for by systems that understand us better than we understand ourselves. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the real question isn't whether the line is paradise or prison, but whether there's actually a difference. Maybe the most human thing we can do in a perfectly optimized world is to keep questioning, keep wondering, keep looking for the cracks in the algorithm where our beautifully imperfect humanity can still shine through. After all, they can optimize our environments, our relationships, and our daily routines. They can monitor our biometrics, predict our needs, and manage our emotions. But they can't optimize away our capacity to notice that we're being optimized. And as long as we keep noticing, keep questioning, keep being just a little bit dissatisfied with paradise, we're still human. Even if we're humans living in a very, very long straight line. So, if you're ever thinking about moving to the future, just remember, it might be exactly what you think you want. And that, paradoxically, might be exactly the problem. But hey, at least the coffee's great.